Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure Attack on Coppercoil, designed by Tal Aviezer. Man, I'm so sorry. For Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, and Richard, and gold patrons, RPG Crafts, Paper Crafts, and Charming Grenade. Thank you all very much for your support. I'm coming off an internet outage over the last 24 hours, so I'm coming back with a furious vengeance. There I am. So, gnomes, I think, get kind of a bad rap in fantasy and in D&D. There's not a whole lot of gnome-centric material out there. And I'm not even sure if gnomes should be classified as the nature-loving hippies that are super into animals, or the more dwarvish mechanical engineer, always tinkering kind of gnomes. And I guess the different kind of sub-races are there. But I don't see them often represented in a lot of adventures or material. Very rarely used as NPCs and that kind of thing. I don't have a good grasp on kind of where gnomes are thematically. This one, I think, uses gnomes in some really cool ways. So Attack on Coppercoil is designed for a party of 3rd level adventurers, although it does scale for 1st to 4th, I believe. It's solidly a tier 1 adventure designed for 3rd level, but it's got the scaling mechanisms in there if you needed to move it higher or lower, if you had different levels of party members or slightly under-leveled or over-leveled, or if you just wanted to add any kind of challenge. I don't think it's a one-shot. It specifically states that it is, I believe, 4 to 7 hours, which you would consider a one-shot to be about 4 hours. It is all in a single area, which makes it pretty easy to run, but it can have multiple fights, and things can slow down depending on if your players want to take a while and how to approach the situation. And especially if you want to add one of the really, really cool optional variants here, which is essentially an evil party of adventurers can show up and really mess with your players and provide just another additional layer of challenge, which would make things a lot longer, and the adventure does state that. So you're probably looking at about 2 full 4-hour sessions just to be safe. So you might be able to run it as a one-shot if you can adjust things well enough. But I really like this adventure. I think it's got a lot going on. It does provide a really cool map that's got everything you need on a single map, which is very nice. And that map comes with full color in addition to black and white versions. I don't believe it has a full color map without grids, though, for some reason. It's the only thing I couldn't find. So the only option is with grids for Roll20 purposes. It's pretty short. Mainly in that it's very straightforward. Your players, you send them. We'll start from the beginning. So Coppercoil is a gnomish community in the forest. It is essentially it's like half post office and half mushroom farm, from what I can tell, which seems pretty cool for a gnomish. I'm not even calling it a town. I'm calling it a community because there's literally a dozen people that live in here, and it is a giant tree stump. By the way, you can look at this map right now. It is a hollowed-out tree stump that's 300 feet in width. Which, one of my only complaints about this adventure is that's just unnecessarily big. That's what she said. But seriously, it's looking at this on a battle map point of view. It's just too big. There's a lot of empty space. There's a lot of things going on in this adventure, but this adventure looks empty because the actual tree stump is so big, and there's not really a need for it. There's not a large army in here or anything. It's all very much a small bunch of raiding party. There's a bunch of houses or anything. It's just kind of that dead weight, dead space feel that when you walk in, it just almost feels like an empty warehouse. And I feel like a tree stump should be, a pretty tight space with a lot going on, and you could make it that way if you just didn't make it this large. You could almost cut this in half, if not in half, then maybe 75% of this size, and still retain everything and make it look big, and it wouldn't have that empty feel to it. So I hate to start off with my chief complaint, but just looking at this map, it's just overly large for how tiny all the grids are in here. And this is a gnomish community. Again, it's not like we're in Storm King's Thunder and you have to account for the fact that there's giants living in here. These are gnomes. So a little bit of a complaint there. The background here is that a Dwerger raiding party literally tunneled up from the Underdark into this poor gnomish community, which is not built at all for fighting or withstanding invasions or anything, and attacks these people. And because it's a post office, they literally send out packages and letters via bats from this like giant gate that opens up at the top of the tree stump, which is amazing. So essentially they send out all these help messages as they're being attacked, and the adventure hook is that your party gets one of these messages. Either a bat just like falls down in front of them, or for whatever reason they end up with one of these messages that is literally, hey, come save us. And it's a player handout that is included in this adventure, which includes a lot of player handouts, which is really cool. I like that. I think that adds to that immersive element of getting all these nice full page like letter. In fact, let's skip down to the bottom real quick so you can see some of these handouts that we're looking at. And what's cool is here's the full message that you get right here. And then when you're at the location and you go to that bat, what they call it, belfry, whatever they kind of store them, a rookery or something, you can actually find an unfinished message because they were like in the middle of writing these messages when they got attacked, which I think is really cool. They even included that as like a separate handout, which is fantastic. A lot of handouts here, by the way. Look at this. And they all do a really good job of adding to like the history of this place, as well as like the current events of the attack, which is a lot of fun. Most of the adventure takes place in Coppercoil. If you can't tell, that's the one map we're given. There is a little bit of information about trying to get into Coppercoil. There is the main gates at the entrance they can go in. There's also this lookout. In fact, there it is. Kind of a side cut picture. There's a one branch sticking out that players could climb up to. It's like 70 feet in the air, and then enter through a tunnel essentially, and end up in the kind of top part of the main area, and that would allow them to sneak up on any invaders inside. But that's scaling 70 feet in the air, which can be very problematic. In fact, it says, I believe, they only move half their speed every round, and they have to make a DC 10 strength athletics check. So that is a total of, my math is correct, 4 checks they have to make. And these are level 3 players, so there's a good chance they are not going to make it up there without falling on their ass and taking some serious damage. So it's supposed to be like an extra difficult way of getting in, but it's kind of interesting that it's there. And if they can go around and actually make it up to those gates that open up and let the bats out, they could potentially get in that way too, although that's also a special check and like holding the gates open and all that. So I like that all of those options are there, and they're all given multiple checks and difficulties, perception, all that, in order to get in. The actual and there is also an optional encounter with a displacer beast, just in case your party, they just like combat, or maybe they like retreat at some point to rest. Then you can kind of fling that beast on them, which can be interesting. It's just there as an encounter. It's really the only, like, if you could even call it a random encounter that's in place here. Otherwise, they make it inside to Coppercoil, which is a giant area. I'm actually going to flip over to the map, as you can see here. I usually just leave it on the PDF, but this map is really cool, and I wanted you all to look at it. It's so big that I can't fit it all on the screen. You can see here I can scroll it. I mean, I've got this set to 1920 by 1080, and it's bigger than that. A gigantic map. I like the detail on here, though. I'm not going to zoom in, but you can see, in fact, there's like in the corner, you can see a little slaughtered snail, giant snail up here. There's the mushroom farm. Like, it's a really nice looking map. It's just a little too big. There's also no, this is the player map, I believe. There's one with obviously number annotations for DMs, but it really needed some height elevations because, and one of the cool things about this adventure is that because it's a tree stump community, town, not even a town, it's got the buildings, some of the buildings are basically hanging from the ceiling, like kind of suspended by just parts of the tree stump. And so you can see there's like a zip line going across from one building to another. This one in the lower right corner is, I believe, 30 feet in the air. and these two on the left side are 50 feet in the air, and they've got like a walkway between them. That's really cool. And then when they walk in the main gates, there's a Dwerger sniper sitting on the walkway, kind of just watching that main gate. And of course, there's a dead gnome right there at the entrance who was like trying to open the gate, and he's got crossbow bolts sticking out the back of him. It's all very, you walk in there and it's like Saving Private Ryan style, where you're trying to like reach him, and there's a sniper out there ready to pin somebody down. That can be really cool, and it's neat to kind of throw that off on the players, because they'll obviously be very wary about walking in here and trying to see what's going on. And that the environmental storytelling that's used here is top notch, and I know that's used a lot in video games and in tabletop also, but it works really well here because you're essentially coming across, you need to be able to tell the story of what happened here without being able to actually talk to anyone, because most of the characters here are either dead or captured. So you're kind of coming in right at the end of this attack. You're trying to rescue everybody instead of coming in during the middle of an attack. You're essentially coming in after the attack has happened by the time your characters reach it, and you're kind of picking up the pieces of what happened. And it does a really good way of showing you what happened without having to say anything. So there's like a Dwerger trying to get into the this building on the left side, the bigger one with the brown bottom part to it is like the vault of where they keep all the packages, like the outgoing packages, because it's kind of a post office, and they're trying to get inside there, and it's got this cool guarded door. Let's actually switch back to the PDF, because there is, let's see, right here, this door's got an owl on it, and it's got a riddle, which is great. I love riddles. Some pretty clever riddles here. I fly without wings, I cry without eyes, what am I? And you have to answer 2 riddles, and then the door opens up. If you fail, it sets a giant like blaring alarm. And a lot of things that happen here are the fact that it triggers various alarms. So like opening the shutters or doing any of those kind of things makes a loud noise, and that means that the players will not be able to sneak up on the Dwerger as they come in. And the Dwerger are already like basically on fairly high alert because they're attacking a place, but it means the players will not be able to surprise them instead. In fact, they could be surprised. And, Dwerger come with that innate ability to, I believe, turn invisible, which means they could also be kind of painful in terms of their own sneak attacks. That scriptorium has a bunch of nice loot in it, but it is, all these things are 50 feet in the air, which can be fairly tricky to maneuver around. I can just picture somebody taking a zip line across and having this Dwerger sniper shoot him down, which could be a lot of fun. There's really good notes on role-playing the Dwerger here. The fact that they are not monsters, they're evil, but they're also pragmatic and militaristic. So in other words, it says like if you manage to capture some of the Dwerger alive, you could like do a prisoner exchange with some of the prisoners. Now ultimately it will probably lead to a fight at some point, but it just mentions the fact that these Dwerger are not here to fight to the death. They're here to basically loot the place and take prisoners, and if things go against their way, they could surrender. And there's all these notes in there that are useful to have for a DM in terms of how to run these enemies in here. And that's very, very useful to have. You can see here in all these little encounters, there are notes for adjusting the encounters and this has to do with the average party level, which is something that Adventurers League I know uses in terms of calculating like exactly how strong and also the number of players. But really, it's just a scaling mechanism and how difficult you want to make these various encounters. There's a specific poison that the sniper on that walkway has. That involves a DC 13 con saving throw or paralyzing the victim, so that's something that the player can also loot off of the Dwerger's body if they manage to take them down before they use up all their crossbow bolts. I just like the idea of them walking in and just immediately getting attacked by this sniper. Although then, I don't want to wait until they were in, so they wouldn't just rush outside and flee. I thought that'd be really fun. Let's see, briefly going over there's a druid, so that the head of the community I believe is a druid, and his place has been looted. That place on the right side was just the Bat Belfry, where you can find kind of the notes that were written to have people come and help them. The scriptorium is the only notable location, which is where the Dwerger, there's currently the 2, there's the sniper and another one trying to get into that place by picking the lock. What's interesting there is if you approach that door and when it says it's riddle, its mouth opens, and I believe you can either roll a characters with a passive perception of 15 or higher can see a keyhole whenever the owl opens its mouth. So you could actually like jam it open and lock the pick. So I like that those options are there in case your players are just flailing badly at the riddle. which that can really just depend on your player group. Your players are either going to really like that or really roll their eyes and just try to brute force it. I hope they get inside, because inside is a mailroom where they find a lot of different things, but part of what they can find, and the adventure makes a note of it, is you can plant the seeds for other adventures. You can basically include any kind of, messages going from one location to another, or maybe they find a map or some kind of seed for another adventure that leads them somewhere else. The only one of note to use here is that one of the resident engineer, I guess, of the place has apparently a bitter rival who, it turns out, as you later find out, this rival actually found the location of Coppercoil and sold the map to the Dwerger, which then caused the Dwerger to actually attack. So it was his fault all this happened. But he also sends a letter to his buddy, who is the resident engineer here in Coppercoil. And if you open that person's letter, this fucking shadow demon pops out and attacks your party, which is pretty crazy. I don't think the shadow demon's going to be too difficult, because it's just a one. It's the party against that one creature, and it's not like it's going to be able to use its stealth much. But and in fact, it disappears after it kills that player if it can. But I think that's kind of a funny thing, is to have this just kind of trapped letter if the players are really looting through letters. Otherwise, and then there's that tunnel. Let's see. Let's go to the tunnel. You can see the tunnel down here where they can actually get in the lower left corner to sneak their way in. So there's a door right in the middle. So the entire area is divided between this southern area and the northern area. And the southern area has basically just the two Dwerger in it. It's actually a slow start to the adventure. It's kind of a lot of exploring around. And I just feel like if the players manage to kill those Dwerger early, it might not be as exciting in that side, because there's just not actually like any other enemies. It's pretty open. There are Dwerger enemies right on the other side of these gates that are kind of watching for the players as they approach. This middle area, you might be thinking, oh, this looks like some kind of cool riddle here, this floor puzzle. It turns out it's just a bunch of drawings that like children have done, which I was disappointed at, just because just looking at this map, it seems like it is I'm coming off Tomb of Annihilation playing that and running it, and it just feels like this is like a floor puzzle. Like, absolutely, you have to step on the right things, or this is a map, or it's actually not significant at all, and which tells me it just takes up way too much real estate room on this map. The only piece of information that's useful, and I like that it's used here, is that you can find the drawing of a pink octopus coming out of a fountain and like waving friendly, and it's got its name of Silas on it, and there's notes about Silas in other places. Essentially, you're supposed to be telling the players, again through all this environmental storytelling, that there is a friendly octopus NPC in this fountain, which you can see at the top here, which the players can use to their advantage, either by calming him down or by just trying to back the Dwerger up next to the fountain, because the octopus will attack any non-gnomes if he hasn't been like fed the fish, which are located in like the druid's home, or just calm down with animal handling. So I think that's a fun thing to do, is to telegraph the fact that there is an octopus back there without literally showing them the octopus yet. But I think these trial drawings are a little too prominent, given that they're actually just children's drawings. You can see there's our friendly octopus Silas right here. So you've got the Dwerger in the middle of the room, and then the back half of the area, so you've got the fountain with Silas, the octopus, who won't actually leave his area, but it's kind of a funny, like, just neutral, like, trap that the players can use to their advantage if they're clever about it, I guess. But I like the concept of just kind of walking by this fountain and just a fucking tentacle pops out and grabs you also. The right-hand side is the Alchemist's Home, which, unfortunately, the alchemist has been murdered. He was the one that had that trapped letter sent to. You literally find like a spear, like him pinned against the back of the wall and a spear inside of him, and then that Dwerger that killed him is also dead. And you walk in going, well, what killed the Dwerger? Well, then you walk in and this construct comes alive. I believe it's actually a helmed horror, yeah. Stat block named Mercurio. And will attack you unless you know the words to calm it down, which I like the notes here. Let's see. Remains motionless and alert. Make sure, okay, as it attacks, it repeats a recording of Baywin's final order each round in the voice of the dying gnome. Make sure you do this in a creepy voice each time your Curio attacks. To amuse and terrify your players. I like those specific notes in there. The last words up here were, keep them out, Mercurio, they'll kill us all. I like that idea a lot because I don't think I would think to do that as a DM. So now that I've read that, I would absolutely do that. Keep them out, Curio, they'll kill us all. Just repeat that every time it attacks. And the players will be like, oh shit, we need to either kill this thing or just back out. And if they back out of the house, then it won't pursue them. So it's kind of a funny area. The Alchemist's Home, however, is full of potions the players can use, as well as an escape hatch if for some reason they needed to escape. I also liked earlier that the fact that they could open the shutters, those bat shutters. You might think like, well, what's the point of that? From if they're already inside, because Dwerger don't like sunlight. They have that sunlight sensitivity, as a lot of beings do that live in the Underdark. So if you manage to open those shutters, you can actually keep the Dwerger from coming into that first area for whatever reason, or maybe you pull them in there. Somehow you can use the environment to your advantage, kind of like that fountain octopus. So those options are there for really clever PCs, which I like. In the mushroom fields towards the back, so I'll kind of switch back and forth to the map because I feel like I'm referencing what's going on here. So this was the Alchemist's Home on the right side. The mushroom fields in the top rear of the Coppercoil place is where an attack happened. The actual building here looks like it's where a lot of the homes are, I guess, a lot of just beds together. But there was a birthday party. It was the middle of a birthday party for like this young 12-year-old gnome kid. And the Dwerger just came in. Apparently the front door was smashed down by a spider, specifically one of the streeters from Out of the Abyss. Knocked down the door, and everybody went scattered, and the Dwerger captured everyone except for the birthday girl, who managed to run out the back, and you can meet with her, Minnie. And she is a font of information. As I switch back over here, you can see here this entire gray box area is all the things that Minnie can know. And this is an important tool to use anytime you run an adventure like this, is you need like that one NPC that players can find where they can really like learn about what happened. And even though I do feel like the environmental storytelling here is top-notch and a lot of the information is there, having this character just seems like it's pretty much paramount in all of these style adventures where there's not anybody else to talk to. So you can rescue her, which she's not actually in immediate danger. In fact, that once you defeat those Dwerger right by the door, there's basically no other danger until you get to the final group of Dwerger. It's not like there's just roaming bands everywhere and they're not in every single door. So it's really more, again, this is a level 3 adventure, and Dwerger I think are decently powerful, right? They're like CR2 maybe, I want to say. I'd have to look it up again, but it's more quality, bigger quality fights than is a lot of little skirmishes with little crappy goblins or something, which I like. So there's just not quite as much, but I feel like the combat that is there is more meaningful. But you learn a lot of information. You learn about if you haven't already, you learn about the octopus, you learn about the giant snails, you learn about the code word to deactivate the construct, Baywin's construct. You know about the potions in there. Apparently there's a fire like that. If you go into that alchemist lab, you learn that there's a fire that had just started, so you need to go obviously put that out if you want to get the potions. And she can read Gnomish, so she can obviously translate anything and just kind of explain about when they attacked and all this that happened. So it's very good to have that character there. And the only other place besides the final place is the Snail Stables, where you can find one snail that was hacked to pieces and is destroyed, and the other giant snail is just shivering and afraid. I really feel like a druid would do very well here. In fact, like a gnome druid, this would be like amazing for a gnome druid. And gnome in general, because a gnome would feel connected in theory. You would, as a player gnome, you would definitely want to have that connection here. But a druid, because there's a lot of just animals and beasts here, like the octopus, the bats, the snail, like just a lot of, the fact that it's in a tree, that connection with nature. So I feel like druid players, and to an extent ranger players and gnomes, would all get a lot out of this adventure. And one of those is like you can calm this giant snail down, and the snail isn't made to attack, but it can serve as a tamed mount for any kind of small creature, which could be nice. Although, and this is interesting, if you do save the gnomes, which you should, in theory, want to save the gnomes, they're going to want their shit back. Like, you can't just loot all their stuff. And that's going to be very interesting for a lot of players. I feel like a lot of players generally do good things, but they also are a little selfish when it comes to loot. And, if the gnomes realize the players have, like, taken stuff out of their homes, they're going to be pretty upset about that. And obviously one of these is the snail, especially since their other snail was killed. They literally use this snail as like a pack horse, essentially, to like carry heavy shit back and forth. So it's going to be very hard. And it mentions that. It says any surviving Coppercoil gnomes want to keep Shelly. Of course, the snail's name is Shelly. Especially since she's the only snail they have left and the community needs her. However, if you don't have any gnomes left, or the characters try to steal her, it's up to you whether players who wish to do so can keep her as a mount or companion, and whether or not she can ever be trained to fight. So, you know, I like that the options are there, and it's ultimately up to the players to make those decisions, but I would definitely hope that any kind of good aligned or lawful aligned characters would generally not want to steal from gnomes once they realize at least that their gnomes are there to be rescued. Especially because you are essentially stealing from their homes if you do. And there is some loot. Like I said, the Alchemist Lab has a bunch of potions, and the main Druids Lab, whatever their name was, Rooney, has a whole bunch of like scrolls and magical potions in there as well. So those can all be, and you know, as well as the usual like monetary loot. So that can be an interesting dilemma for the PCs. The final area, this drawing house, which is on the upper left side, has the Dwerger boss, which is a unique stat block called, what is her name? Something Neck Snapper. Captain Nell Neck Snapper. And she's got, I believe, 2 Dwerger with her, as well as the female Steeder. That's what it is, a Steeder. Which is the Underdark Hunting Spider. That's your boss fight. It's pretty straightforward. They've got half a dozen gnomes in a net ready to, you know, send back to the Underdark. And like I said, they're not, you know, and the adventure spells it out that they are not they're not a bunch of evil monsters, and they're smarter than the average orcs. Like, they generally know how to work tactics, and they're militaristic, and it says she uses her enlarge ability, and I like, by the way, any adventure that specifically lays out the tactics for a fight, even though Dwergars are not super difficult to run, you know, it's maybe some kind of complicated boss monster with legendary actions, but still, I appreciate it whenever specifically any kind of note says, okay, like this person's going to stay in the back and shoot, or this person's going to stand in front and use this ability during this fight. Like, that's, you don't have to break it down round per round as some adventures do, although I like that as well. But having just a tactics section for all the various combat encounters is definitely appreciated. There's also a big note here on how the Dwerger made it in, which is this Dwerger Hammerer from Mordenkainen's, which is this creepy, like, almost like very Warhammer-esque. It's a large exoskeleton digging machine with a Dwerger strapped inside, powered by that Dwerger's like pain and torment. Just messed up. But apparently this character, who is the boss's sister, isn't cool with slavery, unlike most Dwerger, and she's kind of rebelled against that. So there is a little bit of a subplot here where the players could maybe attempt to free her or deal with her in any kind of way, and she could end up joining them, but it's pretty much, it's kind of just there if the players end up just failing horribly and getting captured, like, by the Dwerger, and then, you know, that kind of goes beyond the scope of this adventure, but then you can use that character. So it's an interesting addition, but it's not one that I would think be normally used unless the players really want to investigate how the Dwerger made it into, you know, how did they actually tunnel up into it, and you can have them roll checks or something to where they're like, well, wait, Dwerger can't normally, like, tunnel up all the way from the friggin' Underdark with just, like, this hunting spider and their own pickaxes, so they have to have something else, and you could go down and find this hammer, I suppose. But otherwise, it's not really even used in this adventure. But it's nice, and it just says you could use Mardred as a plot device to help captured adventurers escape if necessary. So that's kind of cool. And otherwise, that's pretty much the end. It's fairly straightforward, but there's a lot of really neat stuff happening. Again, it's a level 3, so it's not, you know, tier 1. It's not crazy. There's actually not a lot of combat. I think if you play your cards right, there's all of 3 battles. You know, the Dwerger at the beginning, the Dwerger halfway, and then the Dwerger at the end. You know, assuming you kind of back away from that construct fight, then that's pretty much all you're dealing with. So it just kind of depends on how much your players want to explore around. And I just feel like the theme of the gnomes being in this really exotic location, which is this giant hollowed out tree stump of a community, is really, really well realized. There's a lot of fun, like the bat tower in there where it lets the bats out of these shutters to send messages. The fact that it's got this whole post office area. It's got a mushroom farm in the back. There's an alchemist lab. Like, all of those things are really well done. You can find dead bodies everywhere that tell the story of what happened. The way that there's a bucket of fresh fish that says for Silas, and you can see Silas written by this, the cartoon drawing of the fountain with the octopus. Like, all those things do a really good job of telling the players what's going on here without literally having to show them all these things first, which is really effectively done. The other thing that's really well done here is the optional content. There is an entire evil party of adventurers that you can add called Balasar's Bashers, and it is led by this Dragonborn, and it is completely optional, but it's that kind of trope is one that I've seen before, and it's just kind of right on the edge of would I consider this overused or clever. And ultimately, I'm kind of on the fence about it. And that is, you use this like antagonistic party of adventurers, and sometimes it's used where they're just kind of like dicks, and they're just kind of slightly above the players, or maybe they're just kind of for some reason they're meant to butt heads with the players. In this case, they're actually just very much straightforward villains. Like the word adventurer doesn't actually apply to them very well at all, other than that they come in and they have no interest in actually saving the gnomes. What works well here is the fact that the gnomes did not specifically invite the players to come. They just sent out a bunch of messages and hoped someone would come rescue them. So here it makes sense that those messages might fall into the wrong hands. And sure enough, it mentions the fact that they just randomly shot a bat down and had that message attached to them with a map to the locations. They're like, oh yeah, let's go here and see what this is all about and just loot these gnomes for all they've got. So they have no interest in actually rescuing the gnomes. Now they will fight the Dwerger only if they feel like they can take on the Dwerger, and if the Dwerger has loot that they can take. They're just interested in looting this place. So I think the best way to use them would be either, well, you could use them in different areas. You could do it at the beginning. I think the best would be the middle or the end, and I would do it the middle once the players reach that northern end, and maybe they've tried, if they haven't been able to get into the scriptorium, then I would absolutely use that alarm owl to have that go off, like the enemy adventurers are trying to break into there and they're setting off the alarm. That would tell the players what the hell is that? There's somebody behind us, which would be really fun. If they'd already looted it, then you'd have to do it from some other means. But I think that would be a really interesting scenario. I think most players would try to talk to them first, be like, okay, let's join forces, and these guys would be like, no, we're just interested in taking on stuff, and we'll take that too, and you could allow some speech checks, but ultimately there could be a fight that could break out, and then you could even introduce the Dwerger, or maybe during the Dwerger fight you have these adventurers show up. You could create an interesting scenario there that hopefully wouldn't feel completely tacked on, but know that it obviously would elongate the adventure quite a bit if you add this entire other party in there, which I believe each one is like a CR2 or 3. Yeah, there's 4 of them here, and there's CR3, CR3, CR2, and CR2. It looks like it's a fighter, 2 rogues, and a cleric, with one of the rogues being melee and one being range. So I think it's a neat thing to add, and I think it works pretty well here specifically because, as I said, those messages went out to everyone, so it makes sense that another adventuring group would essentially see that message and show up. It's not something I want to see used too often because it is kind of tropey to just have oh yeah, here's the evil group of adventurers showing up. That's the exact antithesis of your group. But here I think it does make sense. And there is a handout, which this would be a really good fun way to introduce it. There's a wanted poster, which you could absolutely include in that scriptorium so the players can find this and you show it to them. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And then you later have this character show up and they're like, oh no, these guys are fucking wanted for murder and church desecration and theft, oh dear. And they've got a reward, so we need to take them on. So I like that a lot. That could be used really effectively. Alright, let's go over my quick pros and cons for attack on Coppercoil. Pro, Coppercoil comes alive through environmental storytelling in each area, from an insidiously trapped letter to an interrupted birthday party. Just especially from somebody who has played a lot of video games, I can appreciate good environmental storytelling in terms of you walking in and just reading the room and trying to learn the pieces of what has happened, and that's used really well in almost every single area in this adventure. Pro, it's got everything you need on a single map with full color and black and white options. I do have some complaints about that map, but for the most part, the fact that we get a nice big map with everything on there is really nice, and definitely a big plus there. Pro, it's got fun elements and options for PCs, including a friendly octopus, tameable giant snail, defensive construct, and alarm blaring trapdoor. Just a lot of ways that it's a lot of fun things that aren't just fights. You know, it's not just combat after combat after combat, which it's an easy thing to fall into that trap as a designer and as a DM is just, well, you know, the primary way people interact with D&D through things is through fighting, because everything is built for fighting. But that doesn't mean you have to do that. So you can introduce all these other things, including just neutral beasts or environmental traps or hazards or something. And even that door that has the riddle, it even mentions the fact that gnomes don't look at theft as serious as like people do. And that door it does like 1d4 thunder damage if you fail it like a number of times. And the main purpose of it is to sound that giant blaring alarm. So it doesn't even do that much damage if you fail. Instead, it just gives off an alarm, which can fuck you up if you're trying to go in stealthily. So all those things are really nice to have and make the adventure a lot more fun and interactive rather than just going from room to room and just looting it and looking at stuff. Pro, it's got several full-page player handouts to draw the PCs into the town's history and current plight, as I showed toward the beginning of this video. Lots and lots of quality handouts. Also think it's a pro that we get an optional evil party of adventurers that can throw a deliciously evil wrench into the PC's plans at any time. I used evil twice in one sentence. That's terrible. But what's not terrible is those adventures. I think they're done really well. There's not a whole lot of notes on them specifically, but you know, they're just an optional party, and I don't expect this to be a full-fledged backstory or anything of that nature. And if you've got villains in your current campaign, you could definitely use them there, which would be a lot of fun. But otherwise, I think they're just good enough to be able to use here, which could not quite be a one-shot, but almost a one-shot. It's definitely a self-contained adventure. My only cons, well, one is the map needs height elevation markers in the southern area. There's if you've got a height difference, you need something to tell me that, because otherwise I have to just look at the adventure and know the fact that, for example, this zip line right here goes sloping down from left to right, because the right one is 30 feet high and the left one is 50 feet high, and there's no notes, even on the DM version with the numbers on there, about the height elevation. So if you're going to have height differences in your map, you need to have that height elevation on there. You don't necessarily need it on every single map, and I apologize if this is on one of them, but I did not see it. But you need something on there as a DM just so I can look at a glance and be reminded of, and frankly, even on the player's map, it's nice to have those kind of off to the side, so I can be constantly looking at it, because that's something that's going to come up all the time when you're on a map. Is, you know, your players are always going to be asking like, how tall is this? How tall is this? And they should be, and that's something that you need to be able to know. My other complaint, I guess I'll go ahead and switch back to the map because it's there. It's just too big. I don't know why it's so big. Like, does this tree stump need to be like 300 feet across? Because there's not really a lot of stuff in here to justify it being that open and empty, frankly. D&D, you know, it's kind of built for that room-to-room dungeon crawl, and not necessarily everything has to be that way. And you can have fun with some of these more bigger zones where actual range comes, you know, when you have something that's 120 feet, and you actually have to look up, like, man, is that with 120 feet? Like, that kind of thing. That can be nice, but I just don't think it's necessary here at all. It just, looking at this map, it just feels way too big and empty, and like playing on Roll20, like all the tokens are going to be really tiny, and just for no real reason. And especially, this is supposed to be a gnome community. This is not a tree stump for giants. It's supposed to be for gnomes, so I could think the fact that it could be a lot smaller would be even more thematic, so that's the only weird part. It's big. I like this map. I do like this map. There's a lot of good things happening on there. It's well detailed, it's well drawn, and the areas themselves have a lot of good stuff. It's just, I don't like the empty space in between, basically. Alright, final verdict. Attack on Coppercoil's superb environmental storytelling make this low-level rescue mission to a giant tree stump memorable and compelling. Thank you, everyone, for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.